We'll go ahead and get started as we want to, this is going to be a wonderful conversation, and I know you all are anxious to hear from our esteemed panelists. Welcome to the Illinois Wesleyan University Titan Talks webinar series. I am Adrienne Powell, and I'm so pleased that you all are joining us today for this episode of Titan Talks. We're excited to provide this platform as a lifelong learning and engagement opportunity for the Illinois Wesleyan community. I welcome everyone to participate in today's discussion through the chat function. There will be a brief Q&A after the conversation. In case you have to leave early or if you would like to share, this webinar will be recorded and posted for future viewing. My colleague Rosetta Clay and I discussed the importance of this topic early on this spring and had originally planned to schedule this much earlier in the summer. And, we know the topic of mental health remains relevant, if not more so today. As the number of positive COVID cases continue to rise and forces against what is normal, as the school year begins with trepidation and fear rather than excitement, as another Black person is shot by police, we struggle with staying emotionally balanced. Our thoughts are with Jacob Blake and his family, and we are praying for his recovery. My hope is that our esteemed alumni panel can offer some strategies for all of us to deal with the uncertainties and injustices of this time. I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Linda Kunce, Associate Professor of Psychology here at Illinois Wesleyan. Dr. Kunce and her colleagues launched the Mental Health Immersion Semester in 2018, which provides a distinctive learning experience for IWU students interested in mental health topics or mental health related careers. We are fortunate to have some of her students attending this webinar as well. So Dr. Kunce, I will hand it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Adrienne, for both sort of acknowledging the current moment that we're in and getting us started. First, welcome to everybody in the audience. Welcome to our panelists. And I want to let the audience know that we are really fortunate to be able to listen to this group of experts. They have an incredible wide-ranging experience related to mental health. So let me take a few minutes to introduce each of them. First, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Qiana-Coupet. Qiana Cryer-Coupet graduated from Illinois Wesleyan in 2006 and went on to earn her PhD in social work from UIC. She is now an assistant professor of social work at North Carolina State University. Dr. Cryer-Coupet's program of research focuses on parenting practices and their impacts on family well-being. For example, she's the co-principal investigator of the Black Families Project, which is a national study exploring socialization within Black families, coping with our current sociopolitical climate. Second, let me welcome Ms. Megan Henry. Megan graduated with a BA in International Studies from IWU in 2012, and then earned her Master's in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago. She is currently the Child and Family Counseling Program Supervisor at Sarah's Inn, which is a domestic violence agency in Forest Park, Illinois. She has dedicated her life to serving victims of violence and people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. She currently provides trauma-focused counseling and oversees the children's program using best practices in the field of trauma, mental health, and domestic violence. Third, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Patrick McGrath, who has the best audio setup of us all. We all have a little Zoom envy there. Patrick McGrath graduated in 1993 and is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in the treatment of OCD and other anxiety disorders. He is currently the head of clinical services for the digital health company NoCD, where he leads their nationwide teletherapy services for people with OCD. Dr. McGrath was also the lead psychologist for Amita Health, for many years, where he established several outpatient and residential treatment programs for people with anxiety disorders. Dr. McGrath serves on several state, national, and international advisory boards and is the author of many publications. Our fourth panelist is from right here in Bloomington Normal, so please meet Ms. Barbara Nathan. Barb Nathan graduated from IWU School of Nursing in 1980 and is currently the Executive Director of Westminster Village, which is a continuing care retirement community. Ms. Nathan has a long record of both leadership and service in the Bloomington Normal community. She previously held the position of the director of the Community Cancer Center, and before that, for many years, she was the chief nursing officer at Broman Healthcare. Ms. Nathan has also dedicated countless hours of her time to the local community, serving on over 20 local communities, committees, and boards. Last but not least, let me welcome Dr. Erin Zerth. Erin O'Neill Zerth graduated in 2003 and is a counseling psychologist with expertise in health and medical rehabilitation. Dr. Zerth has a dual appointment. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Loyola University School of Medicine, as well as a supervisory psychologist with the Veterans Administration. At the VA, she specializes in the integration of physical and mental health care and manages an innovative mental health team that has been recognized nationally for its exemplary service delivery. As part of this team, Dr. Zerth helps provide frontline support for veterans experiencing mental health needs, substance use difficulties, and minority-based stress and racism. So welcome and thank you in advance to our esteemed group of panelists. As we move into our discussion, I'm very aware that all of us here, right, those of us online and in the audience, I imagine that all of us have experienced at least some emotional upheaval during this pandemic, and some very large amounts of upheaval. So on behalf of our audience, let me say thank you to each of the panelists for taking the time to discuss these important challenges and to offer some strategies for attaining emotional balance. So I would like to start by turning it over to our panelists and ask them to just begin by describing some of the ways that their day-to-day work has changed as a result of the pandemic. So I imagine that some of our listeners will be interested to learn whether you are still working in person or you've transitioned online. So perhaps Barb, do you want to start us off?
I would be glad to. I've said many times, one of the blessings I have is that I've been able to go to work every day. And it's been quite a journey here, but I actually work at a place where 350 seniors live and about 240 employees. And so our focus has changed a lot, but being in person is probably more important than ever, as a lot of our work is to lift people up right now. Be it staff as they're dealing with their challenges, be it with residents. We work on prevention, protection, and compliance. And in a world where we're dealing with a virus that we knew very little about, and for which there hasn't been good, clear messaging, things change every single day. So communication is extremely important. And as I say, we're all benefiting for the strong relationships that we have had in place for years. And that helps us immensely in meeting people's needs at this point.
So perhaps we could move to Patrick, sort of from in-person to online worlds.
Yes, I went from working at a hospital where I was there every day for many hours a day and driving 3 hours a day back and forth to get to work, to 5 weeks prior to a pandemic, started working for NoCD, which is an online teletherapy company. And who knew that that decision 5 weeks before a pandemic would turn out to be a wonderful decision, because now I work from home. Welcome to my basement, and this is my office, and I personally have found it just be wonderful. I love the experience, and my wife has unfortunately a terminal cancer, so I get to be home with her now and help to take care of her much better now than I was doing as well prior to that. So it's turned out to be personally and professionally a very good experience for me.
Would any of our other panelists like to add something in terms of a different experience?
Sure, I work predominantly in outpatient medical settings, and the VA already provided significant mental health services pre-COVID through a platform that they call the VA Video Connect. And so it was a really seamless transition for us to move our services kind of online during COVID. We still continue to serve emergent face-to-face needs for our veterans. On campus, we're in the process of bringing back more routine face-to-face services, but the VA is really excited that long-term we're going to continue video appointments, telemental health appointments, maybe up to 50% of all of our services through mental health, even after COVID. And it's been interesting. You know, we learned how to don and doff our PPE and clean our offices between patients and assist with hospital door screening and contact tracing, but we're glad to be here for the veterans.
And Qiana, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, as a university professor, we found out we weren't coming back to campus right in the middle of spring break. And I work in a Master of Social Work program where our students are being trained in the field. And so it's been different trying to work with students who are in field placements and unsure of how to interact with patients because they are, you know, brand new students themselves. And now this semester transitioning to all online classes to train mental health professionals has been an interesting transition.
All right, thank you for sharing a little bit about the work environment. Maybe we could switch and take the perspective from the client perspective. So what are some of the main issues that you're seeing from your clients since the pandemic has started? And Megan, perhaps you can start us off.
Sure, definitely. So we're definitely seeing kind of like the more universal stressors, and then a layer for DV survivors in particular. So, you know, on a universal level, and obviously even people not seeking mental health services might be experiencing this, of the isolation piece. Another thing is tolerance of uncertainty, which for complex trauma survivors is, you know, with trauma, you want to control as much as you can. And in this case, we can't control anything. So that's like another layer of trauma for our clients, anxiety around what will happen, what can be controlled and what can't be controlled. And then this kind of piece of when will this end? Because seeing an end in sight has such a large impact on people's ability to cope with things, and we just aren't seeing that. Specifically also for DV survivors, home is not always a safe place, as we know. So, you know, going to work or going to school have been critical respites for our clients from the abuse at home in the past, and that's been kind of taken away from them. Financial strain and job loss are kind of keeping those who otherwise might attempt to leave trapped in their abusive situation. Not to mention financial stress and other stressors, increasing abusive behaviors that perpetrators are using. The CPD, the Chicago Police Department, noted that like DV calls went up 18% during this time than in previous months. And our Illinois Domestic Violence State Hotline saw an increase from an average about 50 to 60 calls per day to about 104-ish. That wouldn't be the average, but that was the highest. And so there's just these layers of trauma. There's the I'm stuck at home with my unsafe partner. And then with everything going on with police brutality, there's the police are not safe. So how do I call the police when I'm home with my perpetrator? If the police are not safe, being a Black and brown body doesn't feel safe with the police. And then the pandemic altogether is a trauma on top of that. So it's very layered.
Thank you. Erin, do you want to add some from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, we've seen research that showed that more than 25% of just the general population is experiencing moderate to severe levels of anxiety just in response to COVID-19. I think Megan nicely summarized, but we're seeing this mental health surge, right? The psychological impact is predicted to be exponentially greater than the physical impact of COVID-19. And we had to temporarily shut down just across healthcare basic services. So there's this backlog of trying to catch up. You know, substance use disorders don't wait for treatment, they continue to go on. So we're trying to catch up with this backlog. There's this new surge of disorders, PTSD, trauma, existing mental health difficulties are exacerbated. And much of the world, you know, probably all of us listening to this call have some sort of acute stress reaction. Usually it's pretty transient, it's a normal reaction to trauma stress, but can be really tricky when you have a lot of psychosocial stressors at home, like many of our veterans do, or that's on top of a pre-existing trauma. So there's lots of mental health difficulties and a big bunch of need right now.
Thank you. I'm wondering for our other panelists, are you seeing this similar rise, and especially in the anxiety, stress, loneliness dimensions
You know, it's interesting in elders, issues of isolation and loneliness have been studied for decades among elders. Oftentimes when you stay in the home, particularly if you are a surviving spouse or you're single, as you get older, the world gets smaller and smaller. And so you don't go out as much, issues of wellness in terms of physical wellness, you don't go as far. And so all the study around this for years has said it has a significant impact, isolation does, on mental and physical well-being. In fact, one of the interesting things right now is, of course, isolation and loneliness suppresses the immune system, increases inflammation. So in the very people we're trying to protect, we're also doing things that are detrimental to their well-being. On March 13th, the world locked down for us. So for our licensed areas, for 3 months, they had no in-person contact with loved ones unless they were dying. It was video, and if you've ever seen a 90-some-year-old try to see someone on a video screen and how do you get at the right angle and everything else, I mean, how did that person get in the box? We are seeing our staff is phenomenal. They are everything to these residents now. And yet, even with all of that, we are seeing significant issues of increased confusion. We are seeing increased blood pressures. We are seeing weight loss. It is just, and this isn't just in the licensed areas. We're seeing some of these same challenges in independent living as people are trying to navigate a world in which we've removed lots of choice and control. I really think the summary is it's a loss of connection, it's a loss of control. And in the words of one of our residents, she's been incarcerated for the last 6 months.
Are the panelists, do you have anything that you would like to add as we're sort of on this theme? It's an important one.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that, a lot of the work that I do outside of the university space, I work with fathers who are in recovery for substance use disorders. So a lot has come up in terms of kind of thinking about connecting with children that they are the non-custodial parents for, and how parents are able to identify what parenting time will look like given COVID. So if you're living in 2 separate households, how safe is it to have the child shuttle back and forth between households? How are we handling testing? How are we handling visitation with friends? In addition to issues related to addiction or child welfare related issues. And so I think there have been a lot of parenting challenges that are also associated with the pandemic.
It's been interesting in the OCD community, which often we think about germs and contamination. Of course, it's many other things than that, but some of the people with contamination concerns felt that things were getting worse for them and went and did a lot of testing for reassurance to see if they didn't have it. But there were others who said, well, I've been preparing for this for the last 20 years. So now all of you kind of get to feel how I felt for the last 20 years. And they almost looked at it as if I was ready for this before everybody else was. So it's been interesting to watch how the OCD community itself has responded to some of these concerns.
Thank you, all of you. I'm thinking too, for panelists, that we have our questions. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you've kind of really sketched out, I think, a nice of all the different stressors that several of your clients are coming in with. And then when Barb said that the staff has become everything, that powerful example of how your staff suddenly are everything for the residents that can't have the typical contacts that they would have with their family or the community. And it made me really wonder about, well, what sort of stresses and strains is that putting on the professionals? So I wonder if you could speak to the experience from the professional, either in yourselves or you, the staff that you work with, how it has played out from that end.
I can go first. It continues to be played out. It continues to be played out every day. There's a new challenge for our staff on almost a regular basis. We're asking them to stay incredibly safe, just come in here and take care of residents. Well, they're going home to their own families. They're going home to their own challenges. They're going home to someone who had just started a job a few days before this hit and no longer has that job. trying to navigate childcare. They're trying to navigate how in the world do I help my child who's a student. They have a meeting for the parents at 8 a.m. I come to work at 5 in the morning. All of those issues. So I said early on, one of my primary jobs, I feel, is to lift people up. We actually put in appreciation pay of $25 a shift to try and both help people and get people to come to work, because fear sets in all of us. So as people are worried about either bringing it in or worried about a coworker and what they've been doing, how to navigate all the issues of symptom control and the stress with that. So we've put in pay if you have to be gone. We've, used the federal programs, but have subsidized that in addition. We absolutely no questions. So you'll get the issues of somebody feels like that person's taking advantage. Well, the reality is if someone's taking advantage, so be it right now. It's just, and then sometimes it's just the letting somebody come in your office and scream. I have made more referrals to employee assistance program in the last 6 months, as well as provided training for leadership on that and offered it to leadership. This is not just frontline staff, but it is an ongoing basis, and every single day there is an issue.
Thank you, Barb. That was compelling. And Megan, how about you from kind of in a more in the mental health world, what sort of extra strains are being placed on the people that you work with?
Sure. I think there's kind of two things that I've felt like have been the hardest. There's the piece of this whole time we have all been holding our own, as Barb said, our own crises and our own challenges, our own stressors, and potentially struggling with our own mental health while we're trying to be fully present and attuned to our clients, and holding everything that's going on for them on top of our own challenges. And I think that happens, in non-COVID times as well, but this is prolonged, definitely. And then also kind of the second part is what's so critical to being able to do this work long-term and have it be sustainable is to have your coworkers available. So like in the office, we would grab each other, after a hard session, and if we need to cry, or we just need somebody to make us laugh, or we need to process and pick each other's brains about how to help the client. That has been really hard to not have that, or to just be like, okay, I'm going to go to the lunchroom and chat with people and decompress. So instead, we're stuck at home by ourselves, managing, all of what's happening for us and all of what's happening for our clients, and have had to be a lot more intentional about texting or calling a coworker and saying do you have a few minutes? I'm really struggling here. So yeah, that's been challenging.
Thank you. Would anybody like to chime in?
I've gotten a few letters from some of the therapists we've hired who talk about the upside of some of the changes too, where now that their children can't go to school, or they're helping to care for maybe a family member who's ill too, and they've brought other people in their homes so that they're safe there, that the flexibility of being able to do teletherapy with their patients at any time that they want to has been wonderful. And they appreciate the fact that in the mornings they can carve out time to be with their children, in the afternoon they can take care of some people, and then at night they can see their patients and still be able to do their work. So they've appreciated at least the flexibility of the changes that have happened, that now that they can work from home and do the work they want to do whenever they want to do it, and set up their appointments whenever they need to.
Thank you.
Just a quick add, yeah, I would say that there is definitely that of being able to, take a walk with my dog on my lunch break, or, and get out of the house and have some fresh air in a different way that you wouldn't maybe have at the office has been great.
So a few silver linings. Qiana?
And I was not a silver lining. I was gonna say on the flip side of that, I've heard from students as well as other colleagues who do community-based mental health, so they are doing therapy or providing therapeutic services in the home, that you have the difficulty of the inequity. So having so many clients who don't have access to internet services, so the option of telehealth is not one that's really there, or actually now having to spend time in spaces with family members who have essential jobs. And so kind of thinking about what does scheduling look like now for a therapist who works in that community space has been somewhat difficult.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit here. So we've talked about a variety of mental health issues that you guys have noticed, right? Either in your clients or your colleagues. And I'm thinking we're also all seeing stories of mental health portrayed in the media. And I was wondering, from your professional expertise, what your response has been to media portrayals. For example, do you see them as misleading or inaccurate in some ways? So, Patrick?
Yeah, I can jump on this one. I did a blog post on this too, because I was watching the news one night and some of the newscasters were saying, well, wouldn't it be good if we all just had a little bit of OCD right now? And I was infuriated. Like, we would not want to prescribe a mental health problem to people as a way to deal with other problems. I mean, no one with OCD would ever say, oh, I think that you should develop OCD and it will make your life better. You know, they all want it to go away and wish they never had it. So sometimes we think that OCD is maybe just kind of this little quirky thing, but it's a very serious mental health condition. And so we have to kind of consider the fact that when we make comments like that, that it can be very hurtful to people who actually are experiencing that disorder and suffering with it for the hours that they do. So it's sometimes off the cuff comments like that people make that I kind of try to gently correct and just say, maybe there's a better way to handle this than developing obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that the World Health Organization is referring to this as a massive infodemic. We know that mass media uses really emotionally charged language. A lot of the images are really exaggerating some of the perceived dangers associated with infectious disease, and this can really exacerbate, worsen someone's inclinations toward fear, or kind of the opposite, right? This indifference. And we know that prolonged exposure to media can create this media fatigue. And that's when we become really desensitized to media, and potentially we're disregarding important information that we need to know. And I think we can all kind of agree that there is abundant misinformation in media as well. I think that makes it really difficult for folks to kind of pick apart which sources are reliable.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit again, and it's apparent that many of you work with marginalized groups who are dealing not just with increased rates of COVID-19, but also race-based stress specifically. Can you talk some about the racial disparities of mental health during this time? So Erin, can you kick us off?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has helped shine a spotlight on some of these really deep-seated inequities that we've had in the healthcare systems for communities of color. It's really amplified these social, these economic factors that have been contributing to very poor health outcomes for quite some time, including mental health outcomes. We know that persons of color are at increased risk for serious illness if they were to contract COVID-19. I know that there's been other webinars that have talked about some of the factors, such as insurance access, usual sources of care, likelihood of working in service industries, living in housing situations that are more aggregate settings, that can make it more difficult to self-isolate or socially distance. And we know that racism and systemic oppression contribute to health disparities across all types of healthcare. And it routinely advantages whites and produces these cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes for our clients and patients of color. We know that in the mental health world, we'll see, for example, more diagnoses of psychotic disorders for persons of color, whereas if we have a white patients on average, we're more likely across behavioral health to diagnose someone with an affective disorder. So I am grateful that there is a spotlight and more attention on racial disparities and more calls to action right now. Of course, we're in a racial pandemic at the same time, and it's incredibly disturbing and troubling to patients. Racism is a healthcare problem. It causes physical and emotional difficulties. And it's really important that all of us in healthcare, not just behavioral health, but all of healthcare, we learn to be open to discussing race and racism and discrimination. It's really important that we are aware of our own implicit biases and how that can play a role in our interaction with patients. It's really important that we speak out, because not speaking out can be interpreted as supporting the oppressor. And I think it's really important that we all learn how to engage in discussions with patients to assess for race-based stressors, for discrimination, and to ensure that our systems and organizations have different interventions to support race-based stress, such as resiliency programming. And we're really excited at Heinz. We've been developing this for many years and helping implement this throughout the nation. And we are seeing more attention, and these are groups and classes are picking up throughout the VA because of the very unfortunate murders and mistreatments of Black and Brown Americans.
Thank you, Erin. I think could others to speak, perhaps Qiana, I think partly on just the racial disparities, but also methods for addressing some of those inequities, which Erin started us on.
Yeah, so a lot of my work focuses around parenting. And so as we think about the fact that now that we are at home and have access to social media, oftentimes for members of communities of color, it can be traumatizing to have to see video after video. And so I know a lot of Twitter activity over the past day, given everything that's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, people are saying, don't reshare those videos, because as you can imagine, the stress and anxiety that you're walking with just day to day, being a Black or brown person in America, and then to have to think about, and many times, benign threats to your life for going about doing day-to-day things. And so putting yourself in the position of being a parent and how you explain that to small children is something that my colleagues and I have been talking a lot about over the summer. And so one of the strategies that we've been sharing a lot is really kind of identifying children's books that parents can read with their children. And I have a lot of them in the back because it's a strategy that I'm employing in my own household, but to think about how do we talk about trauma without further traumatizing our children, because that can be an additional stressor to parents. And so Dan Santat is an author who has a lot of fabulous work. He's an author and illustrator, but that has been really helpful in terms of kind of talking through trauma. So one of his books is called After the Fall, to really kind of talk about, well, what are the next steps after you've experienced the trauma? What does it look like to try to cope? What does healing look like in that moment? So I recommend that text a lot to individuals to kind of think about how to engage in that way. I also think this idea of just really recognizing the humanity of people of color. I think that the pandemic, as well as kind of thinking about the racial pandemic, has really opened the eyes of a lot of individuals. And hopefully we're in a space where we are now open to be able to have, one second please, sorry, I have a visitor in and out of here, but that we're able to have these honest conversations about race. And I'm gonna just mute for a second.
It's our bonus panelist.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Qiana. Did anybody want to add, either of our other panelists' thoughts to our theme here? All right, I think we were sort of moving into some of the strategies and kind of the sharing the book and the resiliency programming. Perhaps we could talk more generally about strategies that you're personally using for your own stress relief and mental health at this time. Maybe Barb, you could take us?
Sure. It is a challenge, but I think one of the blessings is that I've really tried to be more intentional about how to slow me down. You know, we've slowed our world down in that it's not, okay, run home late at night and we run this place to go get dinner and then we do this and then we do this. But using that time to actually slow all of my thoughts down, to think about where I am and to really ponder what are the things that I have versus what I have lost. You know, it's a real blessing for all of us to be in a service industry, to be in service to others. And I think, you know, that's what draws us to our work. And yet it's been even more important to fuel I think I drove my children and my husband crazy. For the month of May, I put them on a gratefulness challenge, all of us. And every single day we wrote down 3 things that we're grateful for. Can be from the littlest thing to the biggest thing, and you can't repeat in the 30 days. Well, you know, something that simple is just a reminder. And those things have worked for me. And then tried to relearn golf, which let me tell you, that puts you in a whole different world when you're trying to figure out how to hit a little ball.
What are some of the other favorite personal strategies for our panelists?
I think sometimes you have to acknowledge your guilt about things as well. I mean, we are in a service industry, and so we do this because we enjoy helping other people. We get satisfaction out of helping people, but we also have to be okay with helping ourselves at times. And I think sometimes those of us that are in the service industry are the worst at helping ourselves because we are so much about helping other people. So yeah, I agree with Barb. Golf is a wonderful thing, and it's a good COVID practice as well. But the first few times I went and played, I had to deal with the guilt of, you know, my wife's at home and she's ill, and there's a part of me that thinks, well, I should be there, you know, but I'm taking care of other people at work all day through therapy, and then I should be taking care of her at every time too. But I had to be kind of come to terms with the fact that I got to take care of myself as well too. So just being able to allow myself the opportunity to take some time every once in a while and decompress and do something on my own recharges my batteries to be able to help everybody else too.
Yeah, and I would say I have not, admittedly, been doing a good job of kind of taking care of self, but my husband has a good practice that I'm a little bit jealous of. So he and his college friends, every Friday night, they have a call scheduled at 9 o'clock, and it goes until midnight, 1 a.m. sometimes. But for them to be able to connect, to kind of talk about some of the challenges of parenting or marriage or being away from home. And so I often recommend that to students. If you are in a space where you're geographically distanced from your family and your friends, trying to find a time that you set on the calendar to set aside to say, this is the time that I will use to unplug and unwind. Because our schedules are not, in some instances, anymore or any less packed than they were prior to us being at home. And so I think that has been helpful. So my friends and I have something scheduled this weekend, like a one-day retreat, which I'm really looking forward to. But I think it's been harder being at home and parenting and teaching and doing all the things, and hard to find that space to take care of self.
Megan and Erin, do you want to share a personal example?
Sure. I find myself saying things to myself that I say to my clients. I think I do that, you know, in non-COVID times as well, but especially lately. Or if like in a conversation with my husband, he'll be like, well, what would you say to your client? And I'm like, oh yeah. Like, oh yeah, I probably would say something along the lines of like, I can't control that situation. And I also echo what Qiana said around like trying to realize like, okay, before this all happened, I had lots of friends in geographically distanced from me that it was easy to just like not see for months and then finally see them, and being intentional about like, okay, to take care of myself and have the social interaction that I'm missing, like setting aside times to talk to friends and family. And I've been able to set a weekly date throughout this entire time with my friend who lives in Saudi Arabia, which is really awesome. So we talk on Zoom every Saturday morning, and that's been wonderful.
This is the one question that I was hoping I didn't have to answer, because I think it's been really challenging. And a special shout out to all the working parents out there. It is exceptionally challenging. I love to do ultra endurance events, and I drive my partner nuts, but that's how I cope. And sometimes I'm a little selfish about that time. I'll do it real early in the morning or real late at night sometimes, but that's how I de-stress. I think in mental health, sometimes we carry traumatic burdens of our patients with us, and we hear really difficult and sad stories. And my partner works in the emergency department, and I don't think he always understands some of the psychological stress and trauma, because we're not seeing it, we're hearing it, and we're experiencing it with our patients. But that's really important to me, to have time where I don't have to focus on anything but putting one foot in front of the other, or pedal one pedal in front of the other. And that's been really helpful. And I really believe in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT therapy, which is an evidence-based, science-proven method of psychotherapy. And what it does is it encourages us as humans to just accept that all of us, we're going to have physical pain in our lives, we're going to have emotional pain in our lives. The goal of our life is not to try to have a life devoid of pain. Just accept that it'll be part of it, but work on ways to minimize the suffering. Accept it's there and work on ways to kind of work with it or to distract from it while allowing it to be there. And one of the best ways to cope with pain is to engage in meaningful activities, right? So identify and step back and say, what do I value the most? To me, that's my family. That might mean that I'm not going to work 80 hours a week like I might have earlier in my career. We just took a 2-week vacation because I value the time with them. I value keeping myself in shape because that helps me be more present for my patients and for my family. And I really value time connecting with friends. So thinking about what you value the most and intentionally creating and choosing your behaviors based on that. I think that that's really helpful throughout COVID for everyone. And that's one of the primary things that I've been encouraging my patients as well.
Thank you. And we're starting to see a little bit more activity in the chat, which is great. So there was a question about the therapy that was answered, the acceptance and commitment therapy that Erin just referred to. And there's just a specific question for Qiana on the name of the children's book author. Would you be able to type that into the chat for people?
Yeah, I'll share a list.
Can people see? Adrienne, can the audience see the chat? Oh, okay, sorry. So the answer to the question for the therapy Erin mentioned is acceptance and commitment therapy. And then Qiana, so if you could mention the author's name again.
Yes, the author is Dan Santak, but I'll also include a link to a list of books in the chat in a second.
Okay. All right. What I'd like us to do is and as audience, if you start thinking of your questions, start throwing them up there in the chat now, because in about just a few minutes, we'll move to do some Q&A in a couple minutes. But I do want to give the panelists a chance to offer other expertise that they have for strategies that we could all use or might go to learn more about, such as Erin talking a little bit about acceptance and commitment, that work. Are there other strategies that you would recommend from your professional learning and knowledge? Patrick, could we go to you first?
Sure. A lot of times when I'm especially talking to people who are anxious, there's one thing that they try to figure out is how to be in control of things. And I consistently try to teach people that control's an illusion. We don't have total control over the way we think or the way we feel or the way we behave. We may try to, and we're going to fail constantly. So if I say, don't think of a pink elephant, one probably popped into your head. And if I say, don't ever be anxious after this lovely webinar, you're still going to be anxious at times. And if I say, don't blink your eyes for the next 48 hours, you're not going to be able to do that. So if we try to set up for ourselves to do something that we're not able to do, we get really frustrated and we get more stressed, and that just compounds things over and over. So it's the idea of being able to, and back to acceptance, I agree with Erin, that idea of accepting the fact that, we're going to probably do better in life if we figure out a way to adjust to what is going on and where we can make changes and how we can make changes, but not that we're going to do it perfectly, not that we're going to be in total control of it, and not to punish ourselves or put ourselves down for the fact that we maybe don't get everything that we want right away, but we have to figure out steps and processes to work toward that.
Thank you.
We've been focusing on, we always focus on all the dimensions of wellness in terms of what we do here, but really being more intentional about making sure we're doing that for our staff as well as our residents. In a world where connection really changed, we challenged ourselves to make sure, even in a virtual world, we're dealing with all of those dimensions, how we can connect people to the larger community, how we can keep their passions going towards good, if it's doing mentoring with Boys and Girls Club, and we do it electronically, or we broaden the horizons of people. We have exercise classes that went into apartments. We have exercise and meditation times for staff. We have, you know, all of those things that, again, I think it's been important to just be intentional and checking all the boxes of, are we offering everything that we could be offering to help people get through this and for them to choose, and then reintroducing choice to people. We're really trying to get to 2 tracks in our unlicensed areas where people can choose the amount of risk they want to take. Do you want to sit down with 3 friends at a dinner? Do you want to, because robbing people of choice is, I mean, I often say we can't kill people to keep them alive. We have to give them some abilities to live their lives and live it the way they want to.
Thank you, Barb. So let's go to some of the Q&A in the chat, and then run down. There's one here I think that might expand into something larger too, but we have a question from a student who says they are a junior in college now, and they're not sure how to integrate themselves back into daily life. After no months of interaction, or after months of no interaction, I'm not sure how to cope with the constant stimuli. Any advice?
I would say one thing is I'm not sure if you all are online at Wesleyan or hybrid or what the setup is going to be in terms of classes, but find a professor, perhaps it's an advisor or someone that you're working with, so that you can have open and honest conversation about any difficulties you're experiencing. So I think one thing that you wouldn't want to happen in this situation is that your academics are impacted by some of the anxiety or struggles that you're feeling, and no one knows that you're dealing with this issue. And also reaching out to the counseling center for support in terms of kind of thinking about, you know, what will day-to-day life look like once I return to campus? What is it going to feel like to live in the residence halls and to be around so many folks? But there are many resources that are available to you typically on campus. And I would say as comfortable as you find yourself, find a person and have that individual to help you to kind of walk through that space, and also talk to your professors. Like, they're there to support you. Visit office hours virtually if those are available, and to start to have those conversations early. Don't wait until the middle or the end of the semester to think about those things.
Thank you. And you all were all students at Wesleyan. I will tell you, share for you, since that we have been back in session for a week now, and students are dealing with some all online classes, really strong social distancing protocols, some in-person classes, some rise in positivity in cases. So our students are handling a lot right now, right? Adapting just like your clients, your patients, yourselves, that they're troopers. Thank goodness the Wesleyan students are still the best, right? You know, started with you, continues today, but the stressors are real and they're there. It looks like we have a question from another student. Gabby says, with now being able to see my friends and teachers, I'm worried about going home after getting reused to being social. I'm not sure how to deal with the disappointment of being relatively alone again after I get myself excited to see new people. So I'm sitting here thinking like, uh-oh, did we just get an email from the president saying we're going all online? Because I've been at the seminar, I haven't checked my email this morning, but it sort of feels like that. We don't know from minute to minute. So anticipating maybe more that move from something more social to the fear of being isolated again. Any thoughts about that?
I always talk to my patients about anticipation is almost always worse than the actual event. And the 2 worst words from an anxiety standpoint in the English language are what if, followed by the worst case scenario that you can possibly come up with. And that's where many people go down is that what's that worst case scenario role. So I like to ask 3 questions. You know, of course, you've already told me what the worst case scenario is, but what's the best case scenario? And then what's the most likely experience? And let's take a look at all 3 of those and not just focus on the worst case one, and try to come up with, you know, a couple of maybe 4 or 5 strategies for if this were to happen, here's what we will do and go with it, instead of just focusing on how bad it might be.
On the flip side of that, I mean, there's the upside of anticipation, which is you're thinking, oh, this might be hard for me when I go back to not having social contact. And so you're prepared for it on some level and can kind of just accept and normalize, like, I might have a burst of feeling really great about being around all these people. And then when I get home, it might be challenging and hard, and that's okay. It's normal, and I'll get through it.
And I want to add that there's a great resource that the VA put together that is free to everyone. It's an app. It's called COVID Coach. I'll put it in the chat box, and it has, it has crisis support information, online resources, substance use support, but it also has just strategies for getting through daily life, irritability, sadness, anger, stress, loneliness, navigating relationships with COVID, sleep difficulties, things that, in college we often experience. So it's called COVID Coach, a great free resource. Nice to just have that in your pocket.
I also want to throw in there this idea that it is okay and it's normal to grieve the loss of the college experience that you either started with, or for those of you who are first year students, the thing that you've been looking forward to for a few years now. Like, that is completely normal, and to know that you're in a community with folks who are also grieving that loss at the same time. Don't downplay what that is, because it's real and you're experiencing it, and it's okay to experience those emotions.
Linda, you're on mute still. Just.
The dangers of Zoom. Adrian, when you send out the email to the link for the session, can you include some of these resource links in that email for people?
Sure can. Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, we'll include those in the email, and they'll also get a survey. So if they have any questions.
Okay, great. So those of you in the audience, that some of the specifics will be there as well for you, the ones that you've been asking about.
Great idea.
So it looks like we have a couple minutes left of talking time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Adrian? So maybe for our panelists, could you share what for you, sort of as a mental health professional, has either been most surprising or most meaningful as you've sort of gone through this pandemic journey with your clients and in your workplaces? What stood out to you?
I think there's been many things. There has been blessings that have come from this. There's no question about it. I've appreciated, and our residents have engaged in real conversation, a lot less superficial, and people listen when they ask someone how they are. They openly seek opportunities to have electronic communication between each other. I'm quite a bit older than the rest of the panelists here, and I have to tell you, for me personally, the electronic side of this has just opened a whole world to me. I mean, we didn't do FaceTime. I don't have grandchildren, but just that whole world of being able to connect, and how, I think that's been one of the surprises and one of the good things that's come about. And the times too that I see that, the residents again are saying, no, this is not how I'm going to live my life. I'm not going to, as one person said, if I have to go to Walmart and get my prescription, if I'm going to catch COVID there, I'd rather catch it from touching the hand of my grandchild. It's making serious decisions, and making decisions about how they want to be acting in this world, and how they want to still find ways to volunteer, to make a difference, because they feel like they're running out of time.
I think a couple of things have come out of this. One, on the COVID side, is that people in rural communities have much better access now to evidence-based care due to the more acceptance of teletherapy that's available for people, and hopefully it continues to be more available to more and more people as more insurance companies accept it as a valid form of treatment. And I think on our diversity side, personally, it's been something that's great for our company. After George Floyd, we started a diversity webinar series for all of our patients in our no-CD community, as well as for our therapists. And we now take a look at how diversity plays a role in the occurrence of obsessive compulsive disorder as well too. So it's really pushed a lot of boundaries, and I think all of us needed some boundaries pushed, and we have the advantage now to really make some changes in the way that we do things. And unfortunately, a lot of times when things have happened in the past, it's been a month of rallies and then things die off. And I hope that doesn't happen anymore. I hope that we continue to look at this as this is the impetus for change that we all need. And we really carry some things forward. And I know we're doing that with our company, and I hope the rest of us consider that as well too.
Anybody else want a final word or share something? So in light of it,
I guess this is kind of like the flip side again of what I talked about earlier with holding our own challenges while working with our clients. But what's been meaningful for me is knowing that this is something like truly universal, that everyone is navigating at the same time. Like, of course, everybody goes through difficult times in their lives, but it's not always in sync with your friends and family or your support network. So trying to hold on to, like, everyone is experiencing this right now, and I'm truly not alone, and anyone I talk to is going to relate in some way to what's happening, and that's something to hold on to.
I think those are probably good words to end on, right? And really thank you to each of the panelists really for being here today, for sharing both your experiences, your both personal and in the workplace, and this kind of validation of this universality, right, of this emotional upheaval that we're all experiencing, and for still sharing some strategies to cope with it as well to attain that emotional balance. So thank you all on behalf of the audience. Thank you very much from our hearts. And Adrienne, I believe you kind of wrap it up for us, right, from here?
Yeah. Thank you, Linda, for taking the time out of your schedule to moderate this important conversation, and of course to the panelists. I know how busy you all are, and so I really appreciate you being part of this important conversation. Thanks to everyone who joined us for this episode of Titan Talk webinar series. I hope these webinars provide at least a moment of connection to your Titan community. As Megan said, we're all in this together. We're not alone. You will be receiving an email with the resources that were spoken about today, as well as a survey. So would appreciate your feedback. And there's some additional information about upcoming webinars. You know, everybody stay safe, stay healthy, stay vigilant. Thank you.